Welcome to the 21 Hats War Room. I'm your host, Loren Feldman. My guests today are John Arensmeyer, founder and CEO of Small Business Majority, an advocacy group for small businesses, and Gene Marks, founder and CEO of the Marks Group, a consulting firm that helps small businesses with technology issues, and he's also an advocate for small businesses. In fact, I don't think anyone has done more than John and Gene to help business owners try to understand what's going on throughout this crisis. As a starting point, I'd kind of like to do sort of a status update. I'd like to ask both of you where you think we are in terms of trying to help small businesses get through this. I'm going to start with you, John, but before I do, let me just emphasize to our viewers, those of you who have joined us on this webinar, thank you for being here. We do appreciate it, and we really want to hear from you. We would love to answer any and all questions that you have. Please feel free to start throwing them at us in the chat column. Whenever you're ready, we'll try to get to as many as we can. But John, let me start with you. Where do you think we are right now? How are you feeling? Is it working?
We're still kind of in the, not kind of, we're in the, it's really devastating, and and it's heartbreaking, and we're still in that phase. And I know we're going to be talking about where we go from here, but right now there is, decimation. Obviously some industries like restaurants and retail are hit worse than others, but we're hearing daily, hourly from small business owners that they're scared. They don't know. They don't know what's next. They are having trouble navigating the current PPP and EIDL programs. And I think we're currently, we're still they're trying to just figure out how they're going to survive and, keep their heads above water. And, we hope to get beyond that at some point, but that is the reality of where we are right now.
Do you think that most small businesses who qualify for the PPP loans have actually gotten them at this point, John?
Well, we want to see the data coming off the second round here. Definitely not the first round. That's not a newsflash.
Clearly.
But I would say, from what we've heard and just looking at the raw numbers, it's been better. But I think many who are eligible are probably not getting the money. They're either not applying or they're frustrated. So I think when we finally get some data in here, I think we'll see that we need to do a lot more.
How about you, Gene? You have your own clients that you talk to all the time. You also have done yeoman's work on Twitter, answering question after question. I know you've been on webinars and people shoot questions at you all hours of the day. You seem to answer them at all hours of the day as well. What's your sense? Where are we?
First of all, I concur with everything that John said. It's tough out there. It's brutal. It is. I got to tell you, Loren, this whole experience for me has been pretty cathartic. I mean, it's one thing to sit back and write about small business or deal with your own little bubble, but since the PPP started and I made the decision to get involved, on Twitter and try and answer questions. I mean, there are a lot of small businesses in this country, a lot of good people, and a lot of people are hurting, and they are afraid, and they're concerned, and they don't know even the very basic questions to ask and the things that they need to know. And it has been quite an experience, just an experience to really see that pain, and you feel it. And then there were the companies, putting aside the ones that have gotten funding. I was on the phone for 2 hours this morning with a client of mine. I've known these guys for 20 years. They're a family-run business near Trenton, New Jersey. And they have about 80, 90 employees. Their general manager tested positive for CV-19, and they're freaking out. And they've been an essential business because they make packaging for the food industry. So they've been running. So they've had all sorts of issues getting people to come to work. And now suddenly their main guy, who pretty much touches everybody in the company, has not only tested positive, but is he's in pretty bad shape. And so they're beside that, they've got to shut down. They've got orders they have to place. So it's not just the funding issues, but it's just
they made the decision they're going to shut the whole operation down.
Yeah, they had to. They said, okay, we got to shut down for 2 weeks, and then what they're doing is they shut it down. but there's like three brothers that run the place. The brothers are going in there on them, and they're running the machines to try and get some orders out the door because they've made commitments, to
Are they
customers.
testing people?
Yeah, they have. I've used them as, now I'm almost embarrassed to say, but I shouldn't be embarrassed to say. Like I've been using them as like a barometer of what businesses should be doing, not only when they're running now, but when they restart. I mean, they temperature check twice a day. They have, they hand sanitizer everywhere, social distancing. Most of their employees working from home where they can. No meetings of more than a couple people. They have a person, their maintenance person is in charge of wiping down all surfaces throughout the day. All these efforts that they put into place to try and make their workplace as safe as possible, and still, because they can't control the employees once they leave and they go home and then they come back to work, and then this guy tested positive, and now they're like, geez, I guess, so they shut down. So they're down for 2 weeks and they're upset. It's hard. It's just hard.
That also raises interesting questions. If a company that you were holding up as an example of doing everything right is now having to shut down because of this, that raises interesting questions about the reopening of America. I want to get to that, but let's hold off on that. Let's stick with PPP a little bit. We just had a question come in from Noel Matawi, who's somebody I know. She's an artist who lives and works in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She has a company that makes beautiful tiles. She's an interesting person who made the transition from being an artist to being a real business owner. Her question is one that a lot of people are asking. She's received the PPP money, but her employees are making more on unemployment. So she doesn't want to use the money to pay wages right now. What are you both, John, let me start with you. I'm sure you've talked to people who are in this situation. What kind of counsel are you giving people?
We've talked to many people in this situation. Because the PPP program only goes for 8 weeks, and because there are a lot of rules and business owners are scared of running afoul of them and not having the loans forgiven, they're hesitant to bring people back. But more importantly, as Noel says on comment, the employees are saying, look, I've got 4 months of extended unemployment here. Do I come back? And then what happens? Can I get back on unemployment if I leave? So it's created tremendous confusion. And in fact, that's true. A lot of businesses are not able to bring people back. And the problem is that the money, as you all know, 75% of it has to be spent on payroll. So if you can't spend 75% of it on payroll, you can't get any of the loan forgiven, even if you use some of that money for rent, for debt service, for utilities, et cetera. So, it's kind of frozen people in place. And the other thing is that there's confusion about, now you have to spend the money by June 30th, but maybe you don't. We have a owner who's on our small business council. He's got a factory in Pennsylvania. He can't open the factory. So he's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to, put these people on payroll. They don't want to be on payroll. They're on unemployment now. And I can't, do I spend the money and the time's running out? So if people are actually sitting on the money also, which is, of course, counterproductive given the fact the money needs to go to keep the economy going.
But it also puts them in an awkward position. I mean, lots of restaurants are in exactly this position, but not just restaurants. Gene, have you hit on any advice for somebody who's trying to decide whether to, pay people to sit at home or sit on the money and see what happens?
So there's a few tactics that you could take. First of all, if you haven't received the money yet, or if you haven't gotten your loan approved yet, we've been telling clients that, remember, in the end, this is an agreement between you and your banker or your financial lender. So it's a promissory note that you're going to have to sign. I've had a few people in the banking industry. They've been given guidelines, but they have some wiggle room to delay the actual start of the loan. So if you have the ability to do that, sometimes you could push it off a few weeks at the most, I've seen, because once you do receive the money, like John said, the clock starts ticking, and it's an 8-week period, and it just goes on from there. So, if your employees, if you're down, like I have one client that's a seasonal business, and they're really not going to be up and running until for a few weeks from now. You've got to use the money for something. If you don't use it and you don't get the forgiveness for using it, then it's a loan. Now it's a cheap loan because it's only 1% annual interest. So, it's cheap money. You don't have to make your first payment on it for 6 months, and then it's due in 2 years. So theoretically, you can refinance it at that point. And so it's not as if it's a dire situation, but it is whatever you don't get forgiveness for is just going to be a loan. So the question is, what can you use it for? If there's anything that can be done in advance, any prep work, any type of cleanup work, any kind of where you can bring employees back, nobody is stopping you from paying your employees more. So that's one of the tactics. I mean, you can entice employees back with some special compensation if you're trying to use the money. And also, let's not forget that, as a business owner, when you applied for the loan, you're using your employment that's subject to self-employment tax as part of the loan availability calculation. Now, when you're paying yourself, again, you can pay yourself a little bit more if you wanted to, and that still counts as compensation. Other employees that might be around, I've got some clients, they're giving them bonuses for sticking around. So there's a few different ways they can do to get the money out.
And you're confident there's no problem with that bonuses...
I don't want to say there's no problem with that. The guidelines right now we're still waiting on the guidelines for forgiveness. And that, by the way, that's going to be a whole other conversation, Loren, in about 4 weeks because in 8 weeks, there's going to be this tidal wave of companies asking for forgiveness. And that's all we're going to be talking about. It's what the rules are around that. But right now, the guidelines aren't clear. And they just talk about compensation and headcount. And they don't really define the amount of compensation. So within reason, you could be paying yourself a little bit more, paying some employees a little bit more, and making the case that you're trying to keep them on payroll and keep them around. And depending on your relationship with your banker, and stay close to your banker, you might have a very good opportunity of getting forgiveness for that.
John, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. And, in part, the guidelines are so muddy that it's kind of an opinion thing. So right. I think it's worth asking everybody you talk to and understanding that this is not legal advice that we're offering here. It's strategy, and people should talk to as many people as they can and keep an open mind. But John, I wondered about the bonus thing. For example, a restaurant that's not able to open at this point, maybe is just doing takeout, or maybe is able to open at a reduced capacity going forward, maybe doesn't bring all their people back. Can they bring some of them back, leave some of them on unemployment, and bonus the ones they do bring back so that they use up the 75% of the money? Would that work, do you think, John?
Well, they certainly can bring some people back, recognizing what doesn't get spent, or the 75% of the total doesn't get spent on payroll will turn into a loan. Now, they can hold on to that money. As Gene said, it's cheap money. So they can just put it in the bank and then use it to pay back, because that defeats the purpose of what the money is supposed to be for, which is to keep the economy rolling. So, business owners that we've talked to, including the gentleman I just mentioned, but many, many others, they're just sort of frozen. They don't know, they don't really know what to do. So sure, they can, you use the word muddy. I mean, the guidelines are very muddy. We're in constant contact with the SBA to try to get guidance. And even they, and I'm not criticizing any individuals because it's very complicated, but even they contradict each other. And, as you said, it's hard for us to give advice. We don't want to be giving out advice that's going to get someone into a problem. Businesses don't want to take on more debt right now. And so even if it is, cheap money, as you say, so it's just a mess. I mean, I don't know if we're ready to go in this direction, but this is why we've been advocating for a much simpler grants-based program that gets you out of all this whole tangle of rules and, makes as few strings attached as possible, and let businesses use the money what they need to use the money for.
Loren, if I could just jump in as well, to piggyback on what John was saying. I mean, the guidelines are so muddy that when you think about it, to get forgiveness, you need to make sure that your compensation levels are the same and the headcount levels are the same. And it's a combination of the two. And if you don't, then you just get less forgiveness. But, I have some very aggressive clients that are saying to me like, hey, Gene, why don't we just bump up my own compensation, give the money to me, the business owner, because it just says compensation, and why not do that? And then I hit that level. And honestly, when you think about it, because my advice is like, well, that kind of goes against the principle of the whole principle.
It does seem to be against the spirit of it, doesn't it?
It does. But then the argument that I get back is saying, well, yeah, but we're in this, we've accepted the loan. If you look at the promissory note, the forgiveness, that's in this legal document, it's pretty vague as far as what it just says compensation overall. So some aggressive business people with smart attorneys might say, I'm going to do that, and go ahead, take me to court over it, and we'll fight you because I've got my promissory note right here. And again, we're not giving legal advice here.
Yeah, nobody wants to have to do that. But there is clear precedent for this, I think, because you are eligible to apply for a PPP loan if you have a self-employed business.
Yes.
So it could be one person or it could be a couple, in which case the paycheck that's being protected is your own. So clearly in that situation, you can pay yourself. What about in this other situation?
Right.
It's really interesting. Along these lines, we did get a question from someone you and I both know, Gene. That's Jay Goltz, who has a couple of retail stores in Chicago. And he's curious about paying employees more. How do you figure out how much? 20%, 40%, 100%? I think you said within reason. How do you figure out within reason?
Well, Jay, that's certainly up to you. It's discretionary. How do you figure out discretionary bonuses at the end of the year? I don't already know if you have an existing bonus.
Is it really up to Jay? Is it really up to him, or is somebody looking over his shoulder?
It's too much responsibility given to Jay. But I just, it's how do you know how much? Again, I think it's up to you as the business owner as to what you want to be. I can tell you this much, getting back to my client in Trenton, the employees that were coming to work, and there were plenty of them, but boy, were they grateful. And, they're planning on bonusing those employees for making the extra effort, because it's scary to come to work. How are they doing it? They're coming up with just an equitable way to do it. They're going to put a certain amount of money in the pot, and the way they distributed bonuses last year, they'll use a consistent way to do it now as a special bonus. That's all. Just be consistent, I guess, is my biggest advice.
John, I want to ask you about making the decision to not worry about getting the loan forgiven and accepting that it's a loan and paying it back as cheap money. There are a lot of businesses that I think are nervous about that. I think they're nervous in part. They may have other debt and they're not looking to add on additional debt. They also just like the idea of free money, which makes sense. But in counseling someone to consider taking the PP money as an actual loan and living with that, is there any guidance you would offer someone who's considering doing that? What are the things to watch out for?
Well, the biggest thing to watch out for is if you don't have the revenues to back it up. In a normal time, a 1% loan is great. But if your revenues have been cut in half or 75% or even a third.
And who knows at this point?
And you already have some debt. You're now taking on more. It's a little daunting. And for many businesses, particularly those that involve people coming together, whether it's a restaurant or a retail store or a factory for that matter, don't know when they're going to be able to open anything close to where they were before. And so if you don't have the revenues to coming in, taking on debt, even if it's cheap money, is a little scary.
And if I could also add to that, because I think John's right, but at the end, one of the reasons why I think the SBA, Treasury Department, the Senate subcommittee on small business, one of the reasons why they're putting out through the banking system is that it is a chance for banks to help their customers and to establish new relationships with new customers. And I think, and I'll make the prediction that if you're a small business and you're unable to get forgiveness for a portion or all of your loan, when it comes down to maturity, I would think it's in the bank's interest as well, as long as it makes sense, to try and refinance that loan. so that you can even out monthly payments maybe over a longer period of time. Remember, it's a bank loan, and I think banks would have
obviously
the ability to do that.
1% is a pretty good rate. You're saying refinance to extend the length of the loan.
Yeah, it'll extend and most likely be at a different interest rate. But if the typical loan is between maybe it's 25 grand, 50 grand, whatever that is, if the bank could extend that to a 5-year loan, if you're working with a good banker, I think you may have those options. And I think if you're having this gets back to the question answered before. If you think you might have a problem with forgiveness and that it's going to turn into a loan, now is the time you should be talking to your banker and saying, I think this is going to be a loan. Let's talk about 2 years from now. What are my options? And I think you might be pleasantly surprised that your bank would be able to work with you on that.
We got a question whether either of you have any info on the Main Street loan program that we've been hearing about. There are a lot of aspects to it that are appealing. It just doesn't exist yet. It hasn't launched. John, do you have any idea when that might happen?
We don't. And again, it gets back to the point of, we're talking about debt. I mean, I know we're not talking yet about where we go from here. Obviously, we need to talk about, for the medium to long haul, some more innovative financing vehicles, and it's not always going to be for the long haul. But so A, no, we don't know when it's going to start up, and B, it's still going to be adding more debt, and for all the reasons we said here, primarily uncertainty about revenues, uncertainty about just being able to keep your doors open. It's not been a big topic of conversation at the moment.
Yeah, John's absolutely right about that. It's the program is just dead and it's still up in the air. It is really designed for slightly larger businesses, Loren. Right now, they're taking.
It's funny because they're billing it as the Main Street loan program, and they're talking about including smaller businesses. But you're absolutely right. They are making much larger loans to bigger businesses, and also, if I'm not wrong, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think you have to have been profitable last year to qualify for it as well.
Okay, so actually that I'm not 100% sure of. Would not surprise me. And I tell you why that wouldn't surprise me is that the loans, instead of being 100% guaranteed by the government, they're 80% guaranteed. So the banks do have to step up and put a little bit more skin in the game, and that's going to be a potential obstacle. So it would not surprise me if that requirement was there. As it stands right now, the minimum loan is $1 million. Although that number they're talking about lowering it to $500,000.
I thought that had happened.
And well, it's not live yet. So that's what and then you can borrow up to $150 million as well. So it's and like John said, it's debt. And the interest rate, it's a variable rate. Right now it's between 3% and 4%. It's a 4-year term. So, again, it might make sense for some businesses. Larger companies might be interested in this as an additional way of getting financing, although they can't use it to refinance other debt. And it really does need to be used for working capital. So it's not that great. It's okay,
John, I think there were some people, we all got so caught up in the rush to get the PPP money. I think we almost lost track of what it was intended to do, that it is in fact the Paycheck Protection Program, not the business owner protection program. And I think some people started looking at the Main Street loan as something, maybe this is more intended to actually help business owners. Do you have any thoughts, John, on who this loan is best for and who should be considering it?
You mean the Main Street loan?
Yeah.
I think Gene's right. It's for slightly bigger businesses, and it's a lot closer to the type of debt that businesses have been used to getting to finance their businesses. So it's a little better suited, perhaps, for a recovery phase than for where we are right now. One thing, by the way, that I want to make sure we get into the conversation is that. Please. There are actually a lot of businesses who don't have a banking relationship, or they certainly don't have a lending banking relationship. And so they have been, unfortunately, sort of frozen out of this process because really most of the PPP has run through traditional banking. We're gonna hopefully see some numbers about money that's gone to CDFIs and MDIs and others in this second tranche. But by and large, this has been for businesses that already have banking relationships. A, the banks obviously care about them the most. B, they haven't had to worry. The banks that they're dealing with already have a relationship with SBA, part of their E-Trans system, et cetera. So a lot of businesses are just not, I don't want to say they're not eligible, they're just not getting money. And they're the ones who actually maybe need it the most. They're the ones who don't have any other access to credit or capital out there. And so, we don't want to forget those. Those are obviously mostly, many of them, higher percentage of them than the average in minority communities, underserved communities, women-owned businesses, rural communities, immigrant businesses. So, I want to make sure we don't forget about them, because that's another problem with the whole PPP system. It does depend on sort of the existing banking system, which in and of itself, has limitations. And this is, of course, going to inform us to come up with some long-term policies coming out of this.
It's funny though, Loren and John, as I'm listening to you speak, John, because again, you're absolutely right. And, but sometimes I wonder, is that not, there are a lot of lessons learned from this, and there will be a lot of lessons learned. And sometimes I wonder if that, if you're running a small business and you make it through this, is one of the lessons learned that, golly gee, I probably should have a banking relationship in some way going forward for my business. At least a relationship, a checking account, some type of contact, because for whatever reason I might need, more capital.
A lot of parents give that advice to their college age kids, get a credit card just because you need to establish credit.
At what point as a business owner, is it your responsibility to do certain fundamental things as a business owner? I had one woman she was asking me about the promissory note that the banks give out when you get the PPP loan. And she kept saying oh, but there's all the fine print that's in it. They're going to take it, the fine print. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is a promissory note. It's like a standard thing. If you get a loan from the bank, they issue these loans. And if you're a business owner, you need to be able to read that promissory note and understand it, because you're going to sign it. And at what point does your responsibility, do you sort of throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, this is all just too much for me, or people are going to take advantage of me? I just think there is some stepping up. So anyway, I think the point that John raises is really important. That some businesses that are out there that don't have this banking relationship, I sympathize, but quite possibly maybe once you emerge from this, maybe it's time to have a banking relationship.
I think it's kind of unfortunate that in a way the PPP program penalizes businesses that have been able to operate without going into debt. And Gene, I think your business might be one of those, because it's not just enough to have a checking account at a bank. That doesn't constitute a relationship. It's really about borrowing money that's made a difference here. So that is something to think about. I want to take one more PPP question before we move on to talking about reopening a little bit. The question comes from Candy. Let's say that during the 8 weeks, we spend 70% of our PPP on payroll. However, we do not have any other expenses that qualify. Would 70% qualify for forgiveness and then pay back 30% of the PPP at 1%? Gene, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, the government wants you to spend the money on payroll. So the limitation is that if you're going to ask for $100 in forgiveness, at least $75 of it should be for payroll. But if all of it tends to be for payroll and you're not asking for forgiveness for anything else, the government's not going to have a problem for that. All they added in the rent and the utilities and the mortgage interest and it's not enough, by the way, but they made an attempt to say there was some other operating costs in your business that we're trying to help you out. But really, the underlying gist of this is keep your people on the payroll. And if that's what you're spending money on, we're good with that.
John, I'd like to ask you about that too. And in particular, I've spoken to some business owners who are nervous about the potential ramifications of doing something that suggests they didn't really need the loan in the first place. So if they don't spend all the money for payroll, maybe they maybe their business was in too good a shape to go after this loan, and they're worried about what that might lead to, possibly even, criminal charges. Is that something that you think business owners should be concerned about?
Look, the standards are vague. I think you have to certify something like, you need this money in order to continue your business operations, and that is subject to interpretation. I'm not sure, absent an egregious act that's obviously fraudulent, I don't think people have to worry about criminal, but I do think they have to worry about the loan not being forgiven. I believe that some guidance has been put out that the only loans above a certain level will be audited carefully. Again, this is where
I'm not sure that's right, John. I think over $2 million, they will be audited automatically. Less than $2 million, it'll be more of a spot check, I think.
Yeah. So look, yes, that's a concern. I mean, and if you're on the borderline of, well, I kind of need the money maybe, or it'd be helpful, that's tough. Then it becomes a judgment call. I will say most businesses are not falling, maybe a certain number are, but most are not falling into that category. Most, really do need the money because they're really hurting. And I think, if it's obvious to any, rational person that, you need the money, you're probably okay. But again, this falls into, and as Gene said, we're not offering legal advice here. Again, it's a little murky. And if you're anywhere close to that borderline, it's something you need to think about.
So let's talk about reopening. Gene, I'd like to go back to the example you gave of the business in Trenton that you've been holding up as a model of doing it right until they ran into a problem where their general manager got sick, and now they're shut down for 2 weeks. What do you take from that? What does that suggest to you about whether we as a country are ready to reopen for business?
You know what? I'm not going to go down that road with you, Loren, whether we're ready or not, because frankly, it's a political discussion.
I don't want to have a political discussion.
Yeah,
but...
and that's really what it's turning out to be. I think that all I try to do is I say, like, okay, well, this is what the reality is, guys. So this is what you have to do to deal with it. So the reality is parts of the country are reopening. And if you're a business in that part of the country, then you're going to have the opportunity to reopen. And I think that there are some things that you have to be really doing, and also some potential opportunities for you during this recovery phase. The first thing that you really have to be doing, though, and most important, is you have to be operating a safe workplace. And I think that's the first thing everybody, customers and employees, are going to be looking at. And when people say, "What do you mean by a safe workplace?" Well, one, I'm watching Disney, for example. Imagine opening up Disney World in the middle of a pandemic. What are they doing?
They're doing it in Shanghai.
I know. So what are they doing? And what is Starbucks doing? And what is Walmart doing? And what is Macy's? And I take a lot of lessons from the big companies because they have smart people trying to figure it out, smarter than a lot of people in the government right now. So I look to them for their, for what they're doing as guidance. I also look at companies that are operating the essential businesses that have been up and running and doing this. Up until this week, again, my client, they seemed like they were doing all the right things and all the right practices of workplace safety. But even then, you're still exposed. Having said that,
how did they deal with that, Gene? Did they go back and look? Obviously, there's no guarantee that this person caught it at the place of work.
There isn't.
But did they reevaluate? Did they try to figure out what they might have done wrong or what they could do better?
They believe that if you ask them, they say it's not their fault. They did everything they could possibly be doing. This person contracted it outside, and he actually stopped coming to work because he was showing symptoms. And so they believe it just is what it is. Then you can argue that if the incidents start going down, you have less of a risk of these kinds of things happening in your business. But again, that's another. That argument can go either way, whether you think incidents are going to go down or not. The bottom line is you have to have a safe workplace. So people say, well, how do I operate a safe workplace? Well, there is, besides the big companies and besides some existing businesses out there, the CDC, OSHA, many states are providing guidelines for businesses to operate safely. And they all have the things that we expect you to have, having safe distances, keeping people working from home, Microsoft just announced that they're going to have their employees work from home until October. So when you see, big company like Microsoft doing that, that should be a clue to you that you really want to be doing the same, something similar if you can. Having, again, the social distancing things, having the hand sanitizers, should your employees wear masks? Then it's going to bring up HR and privacy issues. If you want to be taking temperature checks and even asking employees to get, to be tested, what if an employee says, no, I refuse to do that. It's not you can't force me to take a temperature check or get tested. It's none of your business. How do you handle that as a business? I don't have an answer for that, but the workplace safety thing for the next 3 to 6 months, I think is going to be the number one priority for businesses, let alone, but then there are opportunities as well. But that's the first thing that has to be looked at.
John, what are you thinking on this issue?
I totally agree with Gene that the workplace safety, I would say, which is workforce and customers, is going to be paramount. Be paramount for a number of reasons. Obviously, the more that we keep the increase or we keep the rate of illness down, the more likely we'll be able to open and stay open in some form. So there's kind of that macro level need. Obviously, businesses depend on their workforce, and you don't want your workforce getting sick, so you need to do that. But for the sake of the employees and for the business, but also for many businesses like restaurants and even retail stores, it's a question of confidence. And businesses are going to need to, and this is where government has to play a role in setting some guidelines. And the problem is we got 50 states and guidelines all over the place. But we are going to need to have those guidelines, and businesses are going to have to follow them, because if not, customers, who you can open up the economy, but you can't force somebody to go to a restaurant. So it's going to depend on the confidence of the customers to show up at the restaurants, to show up at the stores. And as a result, I think Gene says the starting point is the workplace, and what are the safety rules, and is it instilling confidence both in the workers and in the customers?
Yeah, John, you say confidence is that's such a perfect word to use. Like, you guys are both from Philly. Do you guys both remember DeBruno's?
Sure.
Yeah, it's like it's like an Italian, like grocery store, high-end products that they sell, great cheeses and takeout foods.
They came out of the Italian market and then kind of built a big store in Center City.
That's correct. And so they're like iconic in front of it. Anyway, so John, you talk about confidence. I mean, when you go into DeBruno's, which I still do, they make you line up outside. All the customers have to put on gloves. There's hand sanitizers everywhere. All the employees are wearing masks, and they make a big show of the employees scrubbing everything down. Like, you can't go in there right now without and of course they limit the number of people in the store. And I have to admit, when I walk in there, you can't feel 100% safe anywhere you go right now, but I certainly feel a little bit more confident in there than I do at like the Acme supermarket, a few blocks away. So you're right. Confidence is going to be really important for businesses so that their customers don't feel safe when they walk in their establishment.
What about economic confidence, John? Let me start with you. I keep imagining a restaurant that is debating whether to open back up if they're in a state where that's becoming possible. Will their customers be there or not? They may not know for sure. And to open up, I'm sure, is going to require a certain amount of investment. They only have so much money on hand at this point. Do they use it now? Do they wait and see what happens? How do you make the economic determination about when to open up? Have you dealt with anybody going through that, John?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And, I think we all agree that for the foreseeable future, and who knows, maybe even long term, the nature of the way the businesses operate may be different. So that's going to require innovation. We saw how the bookstores responded to the Amazon threat by really turning themselves into, community meeting places, really creating a value add that the online, sales couldn't offer. Of course, ironically, that's a lot of what they did is now going to, in conflict with people coming together in close numbers. So I think they're going to have to experiment. it's really going to be a tough time. I mean, because you're right, we don't know. And I think, they'll have to experiment as to what works for the bottom line, what works in terms of instilling confidence, what works in terms of keeping their workforce safe and healthy. And they're going to have to think about doing things in a more innovative way. And as we come out of this, as people like Gene and we come out, we all come out of this, we need to be thinking of ways that we can advise businesses to, how they might adapt. And certainly, I don't think either one of us sitting here has all the answers to that right now, because we just don't know. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think that, I think we need to try something, and it needs to be done, responsibly. It needs to be done with, more consistent guidelines. Maybe some, governors in each state are doing a better job than the federal government in doing that. And but we also have to be prepared for a lot of unknown and a lot of experimentation. And maybe out of that, we're going to find some more innovative ways to do business.
I think one strategy, Loren, that you're going to see happen is bankruptcy. Over the next few months, we're going to see a tidal wave of businesses that are going to be going bankrupt. Some probably deserve to be going bankrupt, or were heading in that direction anyway. But I think you might see a lot of business owners using Chapter 11, a reorganization, as a strategy. Just by coincidence, a new law for small businesses just went into effect in February. It's a Small Business Reorganization Act. And what it did is it loosened the rules of Chapter 11 for businesses. It gives them a little bit more time, a little bit less oversight, a little bit less paperwork to do. It does not subject their personal property, like their homes, to bankruptcy proceedings. And I know that it's a shot to the ego to file for Chapter 11. I know that it's a big hit to your credit rating, which you're going to need to rebuild over time. But for some businesses and even restaurant owners that need time, just time for this to move away and for the confidence to come back, that people are going to come out, filing for Chapter 11 and using that as a way to stave off your creditors and having a little bit of a chance to take a breather while you reorganize. I'm going to bet that there are some business owners that decide to use that as a strategy. It'll be interesting to see.
We had an item in today's 21 Hats morning report about how law firms are staffing up to handle bankruptcy. Everybody's getting ready. We got a comment here from Lene Sheltra, who has a restaurant in Atlanta. It's an iconic restaurant, I believe, called Our Thomas Deluxe. She says, "You're talking about us here in Atlanta, a small family-owned restaurant that runs 24/7. We start our experiment next week, takeout only. We've been closed since March 23rd and are testing the waters. It's scary." Lene, if you're still here, I'd love to hear if there's anything in particular that you're concerned about, if you have any specific questions about how you're handling that, because I think there are a lot of I think you're kind of the canary in the coal mine. There are a lot of businesses around the country that are wondering about that moment. And you're being in Georgia, where things have opened up first, puts you kind of ahead of the curve. I guess what I'd like to talk about now is what you referred to before, John, the question of, kind of where we go from here. When you raised that, were you thinking about just the reopening, or are you looking beyond that?
Well, I think it's a continuum, starting with the reopening. I mean, there's going to be an overlap. We're still in an emergency phase, even though we've got some reopening happening. So I don't know exactly when emergency ends and early reopening becomes mid-reopening. But long term, I think we're going to need to, we just talked about some of the things businesses can do to experiment, to innovate, and we don't know for sure where this is going to go. I think the government is going to, we think we need one more, at least one more big tranche of money, and we'd like to see a lot of that as grants. But okay, once we get beyond that, I think we're going to be looking at maybe different types of financial instruments. I think the government is going to have to step up and backstop some of this. Maybe a greater number of low interest loans spread to a larger number of businesses who maybe don't have banking relationships. Maybe some innovative debt equity products. I know the states are eager to, I'm out here in California right now, and California is very eager to experiment with some of that. But obviously, some of that's going to require money from the government, because you can't, banks and any kind of financial institution can't afford to, drop their rates below a certain level or create levels of forgiveness or forbearance. So I think the government and the private sector are going to need to work together to come up with a much more innovative and, I would say, broad and more equitable sort of financing system coming out of this. It is one of the silver linings. I think it's something we probably need to do anyway. There's going to be, like the New Deal. They experimented. A lot of stuff in the New Deal didn't work. And the whole, FDR said, well, we're just going to keep trying stuff. What works, works, and what doesn't work, doesn't work. And I think the government's going to have to be prepared to do that. But working hand in hand with the financial institutions, with the entire private sector, because there's just so much that's an unknown here. But I don't think we can sit around and just assume it's going to be business as usual, perhaps forever.
Gene, I want to ask you, you operate a small business. Did you apply for a PPP loan?
I did. I actually just got the funding a couple of days ago. My projects are on hold right now, a lot of them. So I'm still paying payroll for people.
Why is a typical client of yours putting a project on hold?
Because of the uncertainty. Everybody's telling me that it's going to happen, but it's just not going to happen now. We have existing jobs that are going on now, but I'm dipping into reserves and savings. They can't last forever. And,
I would guess a lot of your clients are capable of operating remotely if they have the business to do.
Yeah.
So the issue is whether there's demand there or not.
That's correct. That's exactly right. So, but I got to tell you, Loren, maybe it's just silver lining, but there really are some potential opportunities for businesses, and I'm going to include my own in this over the next few months. In the end, the business, we're watching Darwinism at work. And there are going to be businesses that emerge from this because they had the cash and the foresight and the experience that, these types of downturns happen. And for businesses that do emerge from this, that have a few extra bucks in the bank, there are some things they can do. I mean, for example, wasn't it just 2 months ago that our biggest problem was finding good people or finding any people for our business? And now suddenly there's 16 million people that are unemployed. And I think, a percentage of them are not going to be going back to their previous jobs for whatever reasons. And I think for a lot of smart employers that are looking to make investments, I think there's some talent out there that they can grab that they didn't have the opportunity to grab before. And I think that that's something that, that's one of my main objectives right now.
You're trying to do that.
Yeah, I'm looking for a couple of managers and a salesperson right now. It was really hard 2 months ago, and now suddenly I'm getting lots of resumes and lots of interest because everything is disrupted.
Are they coming from people who are out of work or people who are just open to moving?
Both. So I think that's like a big opportunity, like for my business. Some of my clients, though.
Can the PPP help with that?
No. The PPP itself,
Can you use that money to pay someone you hire?
Right now, that would be a separate investment that I would make. The money I'm using is for people. You can use it for people you hire, yes, but I'm using it to keep my existing, people around. Is what I'm going to be doing with it. I have some clients that are looking. There's real estate and property deals that are out there as well. There are equipment deals that are out there and inventory deals because there are businesses that are going to be cash strapped and need money, and businesses that have the cash can take advantage of that.
That's a great point.
I've talked to I'm sorry?
I was going to say, Jay Goltz, who we were communicating with before, talks a lot about how during the Great Recession, he bought a big warehouse that changed the nature of his business. It was an opportunity that he was able to seize only because of the recession.
Because Jay Goltz is a smart guy and he's a good business guy, and he had some cash in the bank because he's been to this rodeo before, and certainly he saw some deals back then, and I bet he'll be doing something similar this time around as well. And then the other thing I also have to say is statistics vary, but many business owners are over the age of 55 now, in this country. I mean, I've read in a few places that the average age of the U.S. small business owner is like 52 years old. And,
Really?
you know, whether or not you believe that or not, the bottom
That's
line
older
is
than I
that
would have guessed.
I have talked to a handful of clients that are in their 50s and beyond, um, including the guy that runs the company in Trenton, who he's like 58 years old. And he's like, you know what, Gene, I have had enough. Like, I want out, you know? And I think that you are going to be seeing a lot of business owners, particularly the boomers, the people that have gotten it, that this event is like the tipping point that they want to move on. And I think that's presents a great opportunity for younger entrepreneurs that might want to buy into some existing businesses. I think there are going to be some businesses to be had based on this downturn. So, you know, again, I try to look at the bright side here and say, from these kinds of events, because I saw it in 2009, I saw it after 9/11. You know, they present opportunities to people that have the wherewithal to take advantage of them. So,
John, let me ask you as well, what impact has this crisis had on your organization, Small Business Majority, aside from keeping you all busy? Did you apply for a loan? Has this had an economic impact on you?
We've actually been extremely fortunate. Our funding sources, foundations and other institutional sources have actually stepped up. And we've actually been able to bring 3 additional people on to help us. So no, we did not apply for a loan for the reason that we have not been ourselves personally impacted. And we are incredibly lucky compared to most other nonprofits and small businesses out there. So that's enabled us to all work 24/7 on this problem. And getting information. No, I mean, our team is phenomenal, and they've been working. I mean, email all weekend. I mean, I've told them they got to slow down. They got to take some time here because we're doing so much. But no, we've been fortunate, but we're not typical. And because we were in a situation, combination of our policy expertise, the research, and all of the fact we have these tremendous tentacles out throughout the country through partners and wherever, we were in a position where we could really help. And to the credit of our financing sources, they've stepped up. So, but you know, we have it's feeling a little guilty, obviously, because the people we're dealing with are really devastated by this, and so it emboldens us even more to try to do what we can to help.
You speak with a lot of business owners. Are you hearing what Gene just said to us from business owners who are trying to get ahead of this and look for opportunities?
To be honest with you, most of the conversation is still, how do I stay alive? How do I keep my head above water? We have had conversations with a few about the future, and we're starting to do more of that. We ourselves had an internal meeting yesterday to sort of talk about where we want to go with that. So we're going to be kind of working on parallel tracks with both dealing with the emergency and working on that. But the reality is, right now, it's still sort of devastation, crisis, bewilderment mode among most of the small businesses we talk to, and they're not really yet ready to talk about the future. We expect that will change, but it's going to depend upon sort of how this all goes over the next couple of months.
Gene, your business has functioned, has been working remotely for years now, I believe. Have you learned anything through this?
Loren, I can tell you that, listen, you know me and my wife have been practicing social distancing for years. So this has had no impact on our personal lives whatsoever. We enjoy it. We don't even have to talk to people when we walk the dog on the street. They go to the other side of the street. As far as running the business from home, it's had zero disruption to our business. In fact, it just makes me laugh. The one lesson that I learned, and I just wrote about this in Forbes last week, was about Zoom calls. Because up until a couple weeks ago, whenever people invite me to a Zoom meeting, I've always been just taking the phone number and just calling from my cell phone, and because I'm walking around or doing other stuff or whatever. And because of this, the quarantine stuff, I've been in front of the computer more, so I've been doing more Zoom calls. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll join by video this time. And I suddenly realized, like, everybody's doing it by video. Like, I'm like the one guy not on video on these calls. I'm like, man, I've been really rude the past couple of years. So now I've got to, I'm wearing the glasses more because they make me look smarter. I think, whatever help I can get.
It looks good. It looks good.
Yeah, thanks.
You also look like you got a haircut somehow, but
yeah,
you don't have to
I buzz it. I colored my wife's hair like last, because I mean, that was to the extent of my masculinity. So it's had that impact on me. But no, the Zoom calls are definitely one thing that I walked away from saying, geez, that's going to be something that will impact my workplace behavior forever. I'll be on video now.
Have you helped any clients go remote?
Oh my God. So for years, Loren, I mean, most of my clients are small. They're mom and pops, they're B2B businesses, they're family owned businesses working out of crap holes and industrial parks and God knows where. And they've always resisted working from home or remote, whatever. Now the government forced them to go from home. So we've been helping them get set up using a lot of cloud tools. We sell CRM software, but there's other very good cloud services that I can certainly recommend to people. And now my clients are like, yelling at me, like, why didn't you tell me to do this 5 years ago? I'm like, I did tell you to do it 5 years ago. So yes, the answer is people have come. And I got news for you, that will change the workplace permanently. A lot of these people will be using this as a recruiting tool. I think it will, the whole work from home stuff, it just makes sense. It's always been there. I'm glad a lot of people are finally figuring it out.
John, do you have a central office or have you been working remotely as well?
We have we have a central DC office and it's closed. So everyone in DC is working remotely. The rest of the team is already remote. In fact, the office here in the Bay Area used to be our headquarters, if you will, and now it's just me. Even though we've added staff, we're all over the place. So for most of the team, they're continuing to work remotely. Now, that said, even those in remote offices had personal interaction with other team members, and that hasn't happened recently. And we have been remarkably productive throughout this, and it's interesting. I mean, we'll sort of come up and assess, all of this, but it's we've obviously had to make some sacrifices, but people have been. It's worked incredibly well.
I've talked to a number of business owners, to your point, Gene, who say that they're suddenly realizing they have a lot more office space than they need.
Yes.
And they're much more trusting of the idea of working from home now that they've been forced to go through it. Yep. I've been working from home for over a year now, so it didn't make a difference to me. But my struggle, I still haven't figured out how to figure out when to stop work at the end of the day. I really struggle with that. There's no factory whistle that blows that tells you it's okay to go now.
I usually tell people that we all have our great times of the day to work. Like we all know some people work better at night, some people work better in the morning. And one of the biggest advantages of working from home is you can try and adjust your schedule to that. I mean, if you get sleepy after lunch, Loren, take a nap. It's fine. It's okay.
Oh, trust
I won't
me.
hold against you.
I've been there.
Yeah, it's fine.
Gene Marks of the Marks Group and John Arensmeyer of Small Business Majority, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And again, you guys have just thrown yourself into this in all sorts of ways. I can't imagine how many webinars each of you has been on in the past month or two. Thank you for doing mine and for being out there spreading the word. And it's such a confusing time. You guys have done everything you could to try to help people figure out where to look. So thank you for this, and thank you for all of that. I will be back here next week with another 21 Hats War Room. My guests will be Michael Kielbasa, CEO of Kielbasa Smoked Meats, and Jack Stack, CEO of SRC, the remanufacturing company in Missouri that kind of invented open book management. Ever since the last recession, Jack has been setting aside a rainy day fund to use in the next recession. He got it up to $100 million. So we're going to talk next week about how that's actually working out and how he's using the money, but wouldn't we all like to be there? John, Gene, thank you very much.